All right, we're recording. So that means we're live as well. Your guys' distracting tabs should be closed. New York Times connections, pause for the meantime. Close your Wordles, close your snakes, close your other stuff that you're not supposed to be doing besides listening right now.
I'm researching for the YouTube channel.
Well, do that after I show you the important stuff. Okay, so let me find my. I do have it. All right, so on our thread for the week, I've updated it. It's got this week's or today's agenda. God, I'm all over the place today. I apologize. But we're going to talk a little bit about assignment 5.2, which is using something called pseudo-classes. It's a specific way that you can do some CSS, introducing something of an idea called a conditional. If a certain condition is met, then something happens. It's also called an if-then statement in the future of programming, if that's the direction you tried to go. But this is kind of how that works in general. We're also going to talk about fonts, how you can change the font on your web page, how you can make it look a little different, a little bit more fun, and how you can combine the two into assignment 5.2. I have planned out assignment 5.2 work time today and tomorrow. But that is subject to change. There won't be a new assignment, but there might just be some more direction and stuff tomorrow, depending on how things shake out today. We'll just play it by ear is basically what I'm saying with this part of the agenda here. Okay, optional stuff. There are 2 links here that if you want to check out some cool HTML effects, CSS effects that you can add to your index page. Remember that index page, besides having the anchors to each of your assignments that we're doing for this unit, you can decorate however you'd like. You don't have to decorate it at all, but if you want to use that as an HTML sandbox, I've provided you some cool things that you can experiment with on your own time to just continue practicing development, web development, and also give you that space to be creative and show something off cool. Speaking of being creative, I need YouTube thumbnails. I don't need them, but instead of just having it be a screen grab of whatever Zoom room I did that day, I think it's a little bit more fun to have the display of your guys' artwork. It can be whatever direction you want, as long as it's school appropriate. I'll give you some examples from 1st and 6th period, which you can see on my YouTube channel if you want to just skip ahead. But 6th period, yesterday, we had one like this. So you could go in the clickbait, MLG gamer edit, Roblox direction. You could go in the like 2nd period. Oh wait, you guys are 2nd period. Just kidding. 1st period. 1st period went kind of in the Mr. Beast direction. Like, I'm just looking for, this is just kind of a fun thing. If you've got some spare time and you want to make me a YouTube thumbnail that you can see posted to my channel, or to our classroom channel, I guess. That is a good use of your time, a good stretch of your creative muscles. The only rules on the YouTube thumbnails is it has to be 720p, 1280 by 720, because that's my typical recording resolution. It's got to be school appropriate, and I need a little bit of space so I can add the captions or the labels specific to the assignment. Okay, anyways, that's all fun and good. We can get to that later on. Let's talk a little bit about assignment 5.2, which is linked here on the thread for the week. Assignment 5.2 is 2 exercises using both pseudo-classes and fonts simultaneously. So the reason that I'm kind of on the fence, kind of with a work in progress compared to 1st period, is that 2 exercises usually means 2 HTML web pages, but that might create some conflict in our new root folder system. And if you try to do it all on one page, the first letter stuff, the link stuff, it might not interact in the way that I intend. However, the CSS and the concepts and the HTML that I'm going to show you are still going to apply the same way. It just might not be in this exact format. The only formatting you need to worry about right now is setting up with our new root folder method. So this was 1st period. Let's go into 2nd period web design in my OneDrive here inside of VS Code. 2nd web design. Go into my Unit 5 subfolder, go and click on Select Folder, and you can see the 5.1 work that we did during our block day. We have this index page. This is where those cool HTML animations and other tags that I offered you to experiment with. This is where you could do that. The only required part on your index page for your root folder. So remember, you'll submit one single root for the entire unit. This is where you can put those HTML decorations, but you do need anchors navigating to each of the HTML pages specific to the assignment. So what we'll do right now is create our specific HTML page for assignment 5.2. So there's a couple different options that you can do that with. You can double click in the big folder, or in the big rectangle, I mean, and it will auto add this text box to type in. You can middle finger click or right click and go new file inside of the big folder like this. Or you can click with the big folder selected. You can click on the sheet of paper with the plus sign to create a new file, which is the one that I'm going to do. So this is where we name it like we're used to. If we were creating roots for each page instead of all HTML in one root, I would go B Blakeney P2 5.2. Now, if I hit enter here, this is just a text file. This is not going to do any of the cool HTML stuff that I want it to do to be an efficient developer. And it's got these lines as compared to these smart HTML tags here. So it's important now, the difference that after you file or you give your file the Canvas naming scheme, that you always include that file extension at the end of it. So after 5.2, you need that .html in order for this to work in the way that we need it to. So you're just creating an HTML file for 5.2, which we're going to type out HTML5 like we, just kidding, that's not HTML5. Come on, there we go. HTML5 like we normally do. And then just set this up the same way that we've been setting stuff up. It's just inside of one root as compared to a bunch of them. So then the title's B Blakeney P2 5.2. Now I need a style sheet. We're not going to be able to do any fun CSSing without a style sheet to CSS upon. So I'm going to click on my style subfolder. You know you have the subfolder selected when you have a solid rectangle, right? I got a solid blue rectangle here. Right click on that, new file. I'm going to go 5.2 style.css this time. And then you cannot have anything after the file extension. So what happens sometimes is when you go to rename something, you'll put some extra info after the extension. That will break the extension and it won't behave in the way that we need it to. So just make sure that after the period, or after the main period, after the file name at least, that it's only the file extension, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, image, PNG, whatever. So we have our HTML 5.2 kind of ready to go. It's blank because our line 10 is just an empty body tag. We have our empty 5.2 style sheet here in our style subfolder, and we have our unit 5 index all ready to connect these three to one another. So if you go back to your HTML page here and go to the end of line 6, hit enter. This is where you'll add your Zelda link. So you can type LINK and then hit enter. That's going to give you your REL style sheet as well as your href, with the spot already ready to go to put in your style sheets by putting the subfolder first, style slash, and then the 5.2 style.css specific to the 5.2 HTML. The last thing you need to do on this Zelda link tag, even though it gives you rel and high ref, you still need to hit spacebar and go type equals, and then text/CSS in order for that style sheet to fully work. The last step, you can kind of do these in the same order that I'm doing them, but if you'd prefer to go in opposite direction, you can also experiment with that. The last step that you need to do after you've created your style sheet, or sorry, first create your HTML and your style sheet, then you need to link your style sheet to your HTML. Now we need to link the HTML to our table of contents, to our index page here, by going to the end of our anchor, and then hitting enter, enter again to get our auto high ref filled out with our start and end tag. This is where we'll put our new 5.2 HTML file and label it with some content so we can actually click on it, so that when we run our table of contents, I'm able to access both 5.1 and 5.2. Once you guys submit that or finish that and submit it to turn in. So this is the part that you can decorate with whatever you'd like. Decorations here, or other HTML stuff you want to experiment with. That's all going to be on your index page, which I closed. Try that again. Index page, and you can just, the only thing that's required are these links and your name, so I know which unit I'm grading when I'm looking at this. Okay, let's talk about how you can, the two main ideas of 5.2, which is going to be pseudo classes and fonts. So I'm just going to go here and go, this is some placeholder paragraph. And I'm going to add a different type of text-based element like a header. This is a text-based element, header, like that. Okay, so if I were to go to my 5.2 from my table of contents here, you can see we've just got normal HTML stuff we're used to. The first part of the exercise for 5.2 is changing up the regular text to be a different type of font, the headlines to also be a different type of font, and any blocks, that's going to be your div-based elements, any blocks labeled code, so that's divs with a class of code, is going to have this specific CSS on it for this first exercise. So if you go to P2 and then go down to the replies here, I did this in a out of order a little bit, but CSS fonts 3, the final one in the row, is the W3 Schools that talks about how you can change the font for your page. So it says right here, big text, font selection is important. You might not realize it, but there is a whole ton of psychology. There's a whole ton of association. There's a lot of different natures to the font that you choose. If you've taken graphic design, you understand typography a little bit. But if you think about Times New Roman on an essay versus Comic Sans on an essay, those are going to communicate two different things, even if they're saying the exact same words. So selecting your font is very important. The first thing you need to choose when you're selecting your font is something called a font family. There's two main types that you're going to be using the most frequently, and those are going to be serif and sans serif. So the big difference, there's this example right here that's really useful on W3 Schools. Serif just has all the fancy stuff. Times New Roman is a classic serif font. So it's got all this extra stuff right here. Versus sans serif, that prefix means none, right? No serif. It's just the straight letter, a lot more monospaced, meaning singular spaced, same distance, clean lines, no small strokes, and modern and minimalistic look. These are the two main types of font families that you're going to be assigning here. So if I run this HTML, if I go back to 5.2, I zoom in. Is this a sans serif font by default or a serif font by default? It's a serif, because you can see all these little extra additions on the H, the I, the A, the T, right? All of these extra stuff is going to tell you that this is a sans serif font. I mean, sorry, a serif font. It's Times New Roman. To change that, we can go into our 5.2 style sheet and set a rule for the body. The property that you change in order to change the font is font-family. So you'll notice when I add my colon, there's a whole ton of different options here by name and by style or by grouping. When I say grouping, I mean these groupings. We have all these different options here, but if I just set this to sans serif, grouping it all together into one type of font style, if I go back to my output, it's taken away all of those fancy things for the most part. There's still some on the T. But now every line is nice and straight. It doesn't have any extra detail or extra kind of frill to it. It's got a much more modern and minimalistic appearance by simply setting the entire body to have a font family of this type of font. With CSS fonts, you can assign them by name. So here's some examples of some serif fonts that you've heard of, sans serif fonts. These are the most commonly used ones. There's the ones that you're going to use less frequently down here, unless you're going for that kind of effect. But these fonts have specific names because you can assign specific fonts within quotes inside of the font family property. So like if I wanted Garamond, it's one of my favorite fonts, I would put quote, capital Garamond. And then if I go back to my output, since that's a recognized and like general universal font, if I go back here, it's going to set my text to be Garamond. It's another type of serif font. It's a little different from Times New Roman. But you can see that just by assigning the font family to a name of Garamond, it's going to work in the way that I need it to. You can add multiple different font names. Like if I wanted to, if we go back to CSS fonts here, and let me find that serif list right here. If I wanted Times New Roman first, but if Times New Roman can't load, I want Georgia to load. And then if Georgia can't load, I can add Garamond. I can add them in the order that I want them to appear using the quotes. So if I go here and then Times New Roman, it's gonna load because it for sure can recognize that. Separated by commas, and then quotes here, and then we'll go Georgia. We'll mix up the order a little bit. Georgia. It's gonna go, I'm gonna look for Times New Roman first, then Garamond, then Georgia. But if it can't find any of those, I need to give it a grouping, which all of these are serif fonts. So I'll just put that right at the end of my value here. So it should have gone back to Times New Roman, which it has. There's a little subtle differences in the swoops on the little serifs. But if Times New Roman couldn't load, it would take Garamond. Okay, we'll go back. It's Garamond now. If Garamond can't load, as if it's literally not there, it's going to take Georgia, which has got a little bit fatter on the top, the T's, the I's, it's a little bit more squat. And if Georgia can't load, it would just set it to a default serif font like this. So do those a couple times. That's your font family property that you're going to set for the entirety of the body or a specific type of element. And you put a list of all the different options you want to take advantage of using CSS fonts. So if we're looking at assignment 5.2, we're setting a couple different selectors to a couple different types of fonts. And exercise 2, we're going to be using pseudo-classes. So pseudo-classes are a way to create, like I mentioned briefly earlier, those conditional statements. If certain conditions are met, then something specific will happen. So like if I had an anchor here that just went to YouTube. Oh, I need the YouTube link. 1 sec. Or Canvas. Let's do Canvas. We'll have it go to my Canvas announcements, so it probably won't load. But put that link in there. Go in between the tags. Canvas announcements. Okay. I'm going to close my port because I need to show you how this works when you run it fresh. This anchor by default is going to have some styling. We're used to that, right? When I run this, you can see that Canvas announcements is set to a certain kind of font. I'm going to zoom into 300% here. Set to a certain font. It's got the blue. It's got the underline. It's got all these defaults. When I click on this, see if it even takes me there. Yeah, it takes me to the login. It becomes kind of that purple color. That means you've clicked on it, right? We know that. You can use pseudo classes that when a certain condition is met, like a link has been visited, it changes the styling on the entire thing. Now, in order to do that, if we go to our thread for the week, it's going to be the first CSS pseudo classes. What actually are they? They're going to be defining a special state of an element like an anchor has been visited. So if I go into my CSS here, if I try to change the way that the anchor looks by visiting it, doing this is only going to affect the entirety of the thing. We don't want to do that. We want to add that pseudo class so that it becomes specific to when the link has been visited. To add a pseudo class, you simply add a colon and then the name of the pseudo class to the selector that you're trying to write the conditional for. You're trying to write the if-then statement for. There's a bunch of examples for the anchor specifically. This is where I use it most commonly. But we have visited links, we have mouse over links, and we have the link being clicked on. All of these are different colors because all of these are different conditions that can be met. So if I go a:visited, so that means I've clicked on the link, I've gone to the anchor, I've been taken to that specific page. I can set the font weight to be bolder. I can set the color to be green. Like I can do all types of the same CSS that you're used to. Excuse me. The same CSS that you're used to, but I can add the specific condition that when it happens, that's what is going to, that's the only time the CSS would apply. So, hold on, it's not doing what I need it to, of course. Let's take this color green off. Excuse me. We'll set the font size to extra small. That's extra large. Okay. So now, if I go back here, got to rerun it, sorry. Come on, don't do this. It should have, in theory, after I've clicked on the link, set the font weight to bold and set the font size to extra small. So what we could do though, is do a one that's a little bit more responsive for video's sake and for demonstration's sake. This is going to be hover. So this is when you're hovering over the anchor, this CSS is applied. If the mouse is on top of the link, then this CSS inside will happen. The condition has been met, so the then becomes true. And we'll set the color on this one to be red. Let's see if we can set the font family. Bless you. We'll set it to Courier New, so it looks a little bit different. Okay, so I'm gonna run this page. Normal link, but when I hover over it, it's gonna change because the condition has been met. That's pseudo classes. It's just the way to get using a class, using a specific type of class, but on a conditional basis, so that when a certain thing happens, that CSS inside gets applied. Does that make sense? It's your conditionals. If I'm hovering, then red, courier, extra bold, extra font, whatever. So, fonts and pseudo classes, your CSS should look something like this if you've been just following along with me, or if you want to take a screenshot or something like that for your notes. These are going to be the two main ideas that we are experimenting with on 5.2. So the reason I'm not having you guys get started necessarily is because there are two different exercises on one single HTML. That's going to create some issues when regular text are set to Verdana here or Black Arial here. So in the meantime, just read a little bit about pseudo classes, about fonts, get familiar with how you can create those. You can reference this video as well. But on Friday, I will have adjusted this to be a little bit more accurate to what we're actually trying to do with these two pieces of HTML and CSS. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to wrap up the Zoom room. You guys can look around for some of those HTML decorations, HTML cool stuff you can add to your index page. I can see some of you working on thumbnails, so you can continue doing that. Yeah, this is more of an informative day than a work day. Tomorrow we'll be walking through the actual application of these in our web design sense. Sound good? Okay, good deal.